They failed the first test. This upcoming test looks a lot like the first one. Here come the Hawkeyes to Michigan Stadium. We bring in Steve Days of Michigan podcast to break down the Wolverines and the Hawkeyes. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm doing good today. We'll be feeling at about 3:30 Eastern on Saturday, but today I'm feeling.
Absolutely. It should be a good one. And for those of us who don't have a stake in the game, these are the kind of football games I love. But then again, I said the same thing approaching Wisconsin, Michigan, and I shut it off at halftime and moved on to other games after I thought that was going to be the game of the weekend. The thing we know, of course, about the Iowa Hawkeyes, Steve, is that they're very much like Wisconsin. They know who they are, what they do, what their identity is. They know full well what they're capable of and what their limitations are, and they play to their strengths, and here they come. They're going to do what they do.
And that's how Kirk Ferentz has built that program from day one. And by and large, it's worked out for him. And it's almost, a carbon copy of what Michigan was up against with Wisconsin. And you'll recall, I was very pessimistic about that game. I don't think you go to Camp Randall to find yourself. You can go in there and win if you have better talent and you're executing with that talent than them. But that's not a place where, things just kind of suddenly come together for you. You don't do that against teams that have such a built-in culture that they rarely, if ever, deviate from unless injuries or something, that's an outlier forces them to do so. And now if you go back and watch that game, you watch the film of that game, Wisconsin's a very good football team. But all this last son of Krypton talk, Mark, I've watched every football game Michigan has played since film is available, going back to 1969. So like 5 years before I was born. That's the worst football game I've ever seen Michigan play. They've never been down 28-0 at halftime, ever. Not when Woody put up 50 on him and went for two because he couldn't go for three. They weren't down 28-0 at half. Not when Dennis Dixon, I think, just scored another touchdown on Lloyd Carr in 2007. They weren't down 28-0 at a half. I was at the Donovan McNabb game where we tried to win him the Heisman Trophy ourselves that day. We weren't down 28-0. It's never happened before. And I think you saw the next week, on top of an emotional letdown, with Northwestern just stayed disciplined and played in their gaps. They made Wisconsin look like another really good Wisconsin team. Michigan made them look like the 85 Bears. So I think that's where it makes evaluating this game difficult. Rutgers is historically terrible. And, you're talking about a program, there's been 19 Big Ten teams shut out, Mark, since Rutgers joined the conference. 9 of them were Rutgers. So you're dealing with a Sun Belt level program in the Big Ten. Anything you do against them has to be taken with a kilowatt of salt. On the other hand, I don't know anybody that thought Michigan was going to cover that 28-point spread. Maybe you did. Nobody in the Michigan community thought they were. Nobody. I mean, nobody. And they nearly doubled it. All right. So you have to, on some level, acknowledge Michigan played better than was anticipated. So we're still trying to figure out who this team is. Now, this is a better spot to find yourself. You're at home, number one. You don't have the major revenge angle that you had going into the Wisconsin game where we really put it on them last year. And so this game was circled for them. Number two, we have this game circled. I mean, Michigan did not have its homecoming last week, as you typically would, the first home game after a road game. We saved it for this game because, Michigan has lost 5 of its last 6 to Iowa. So this is a better spot to see if Michigan is clicking. And at some point, Mark, they're going to. There's too much talent on that roster. They're going to put 38 4- and 5-star recruits on the field Saturday, according to 24/7 Sports. That's like 2 less than Clemson. So at some point, those guys, particularly in that kind of an offense, are going to click. Our big hope is that it happens before they lose 2 or 3 games. And speaking of that, I think Michigan's season is on the line Saturday. And I think if you lose a second Big Ten game before you even get to that tough divisional play, you've got a lot of egos, a lot of people looking at their NFL futures, a lot of disjointedness in the program already. And you start taking that, you hand a team a dream crusher loss this early in the year, and I think this thing could get 6-6, 7-5 sideways really quick. So a lot on the line for Michigan on Saturday.
Steve, when I reviewed Iowa in the preseason versus Wisconsin, I felt that those were the two best teams in the division. And then last second, I went fool's gold and picked Nebraska to win the West. But I generally thought those were the two most solid teams in the division. And it was difficult for me to distinguish who was better. And much like you've set up on our show, Iowa's just get that brutal road to a Big Ten championship game. But in regards to what they do, Wisconsin obviously has passed the supreme test against Michigan that they have faced. Iowa's not had that type of game, although they went on the road to Iowa State and found themselves up by 1 at the end of the game. But boy, that could have gone either way. The telling portion here, and I don't know if you can read into this, Vegas said Wisconsin was 3.5 points better than Michigan, at least by the end of the week on the betting line, while Michigan opens as a 7-point favorite at home, albeit at home. Of course, that's a 3 to 7 point swing right there. So your thoughts about what Vegas is valuing Michigan at versus Iowa?
Well, you look at that Wisconsin-Michigan line, it really didn't move all week. It went from 3, 3.5, 3. It just kind of bounced back and forth. It stayed steady. That game, the Michigan-Iowa line is about 3.5. Last I checked, right before we came on. And so since you and I are taping this on a Tuesday afternoon, for a couple things about betting lines. They are not set to get an equal amount of action on both sides. That's a common fan trope. It's not. It's up there with, we won our bowl game, so that means we're young and everybody's coming back. Or we lost a bunch of our starters, so that means the new guys are all faster and quicker. Okay, I mean, those are fan tropes that just aren't true. A line is determined by their own power rating of a game as well as the situation. The line will then move based off of getting an equal amount of action on both sides. So when you see a line move 3.5 points, like a Michigan-Iowa line has moved this early in the week, because the public isn't betting yet. They always bet later in the week. So when a line moves like that, one of two things has taken place. A, there's been some major injury news that has caused it. That's not the case here. Michigan has a couple of key injuries, so does Iowa. But Michigan's the team with the overall depth advantage, so they're going to be the healthier team on Saturday. So the other issue then is that a lot of guys who do this professionally for a living are sitting around waiting for the opening lines, where those are the weakest lines. They get tighter as the week goes on, and they'll pounce on where their power ratings say there's a massive number gap. And what that tells you is that the guys who do this professionally pounced on Iowa, and the books are panicking right now and diminishing their risk to try to now entice people when the public comes in. And Michigan's a big public team. When the public comes in later this week, people look at that line and say, oh, Michigan's desperate. They're at home. They got to win. I only got to lay 3.5. Right? That's kind of what's going on there. So I don't know what to expect from Michigan on Saturday. I know what Iowa's going to do, and you pointed that out. And, unless Michigan suffers a bunch of turnovers, Iowa's probably not scoring more than 24 points in the game. But, I could see Michigan score 10, 5. I think there's that much variance. I think you're dealing with a team right now that has some ego issues, some chemistry issues. And then I think they got a nice jolt of confidence by making some big adjustments last week. The biggest one was putting Josh Gaddis on the field to coach his own offense. And keep in mind, the Michigan team is used to their OC being on the field because that's where Jim Harbaugh is, and he has been until this year, the offensive coordinator. So they're used to that. But I also, it's the old Mike Tyson line. Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. What we've seen under Harbaugh is they're really good as bullies. When they get a lead on you, they usually grow that lead and squeeze you out. On the other hand, they're not much of a comeback machine. So if Iowa gets off to a quick start on Saturday, who knows how Michigan will respond to that? I don't know.
Michigan, Iowa at the Big House. We got Steve Deace on the line from Michigan Podcast. Wolverines lead the all-time series, as you might expect, 41-15 with 4 ties. But Steve notes the recent Iowa success. I saw some of the notes from Jim Harbaugh's press conference this week. He spoke to consistency. He was putting a lot on the Rutgers effort, calling consistency to be a trend. If you do 2 consecutive games, I would beg to differ necessarily the definition of the terms that Harbaugh was using, calling 2 games a trend. But if he's going to go with that, obviously he's trying to build something off of this Rutgers effort in regards to making his football team more confident in going into this Hawkeyes game.
Yeah, I think you saw Michigan treat that as a new season opener. And you've got a weird game against Army, which with a weird system, there's not much you can glean from that. You had an opening game against Middle Tennessee where you knew you were an overwhelming favorite, so you kind of mailed that in. And then you had an utter and complete faceplant against Wisconsin, a loss of historical magnitude for the Michigan program. So when those are the first three games, the first quarter of your season, you can't glean anything of any hope. Maybe the fact that, Army had the ball with a chance to win the game in overtime and your defense came up with the big stop. That might be the only positive that you can glean from the first three games of the year that Michigan played. So it's pretty clear they were treating this Rutgers game as kind of season opener 2.0. And that kind of talk you're talking about is the kind of talk a coach usually makes when they play a scrub in the opening game of the year. And he wants that to kind of set the tone of confidence for his team. But again, a lot of that, what it means is going to be declared this Saturday. If you see Michigan come out and play very well, then I think you could see them with their talent base get on a run. But if you don't and they lose, I think you're going to see, with those goals that they all talked about from the head coach on down, very openly going into the season. If you take those things off the table and there's a lot of season left to play and you are already struggling with egos and leadership and everything else, then, I think you could see that fragile psyche return.
We've got Steve Dace on the line from Michigan Podcast. Join him on all the audio platforms and, of course, here on YouTube as well with his Michigan Podcast. Great stuff and content right there.